Yes, hello everybody. So I learned something very helpful about PowerPoint, and we are in one of the main topics, what is an introduction of macroeconomics about in a developed economy, that we are talking about money, and we introduced what is money. Money is just a good with some special properties, and well, these properties just come from the function for which we want to use money, and from this then we have also our motives of holding money, which we will later on find in our theoretical models when we start to talk about this, and there we will have then so-called money demand functions. Well, and at this point we were in the last lecture. We did use this money demand function, and from the transaction and the precautionary motive of demand, we did use a positive dependence on income in general, and from the speculative motive and from the classical opportunity cost argument. If you look at money at some investment, then we could say that holding our assets in money, then we have an interest rate of 0, and if an alternative way to invest it in stocks or something like this, or in government bonds, then in general, if we are not in the special times before Corona, we will obtain a positive interest, and then from this opportunity cost argumentation, we obtain the negative dependence on interest rates, and from the speculative motive, there we are also comparing bonds and assets, and we have the negative dependence between the value of bonds and the price of stocks. And so the lower the interest rate, the more people are expecting that stock prices will fall in future. So they will hold money to have cash tomorrow, since then at low stock prices they want to invest. And in this part in this argumentation for the speculative motive, we of course also have to keep in mind that the assumption is that more people in the market are expecting prices to fall, because of course still there have to be other people which are still buying stocks. So, and now we also want to talk about the relation between prices and interest rates, and this is the so-called Fisher relation. And hopefully what I'm doing now, it is something where you have some kind of aha moment and you say, well, this I have seen already in other lectures. Because, well, we have argued that we are holding money, the lower interest rates are, but also we have to keep in mind, to save money or not to consume all our income comes from the situation that we just think, well, if I'm not consuming today and I'm saving, then hopefully I can buy something tomorrow. Well, and the higher the interest rate, then I can say 4%, 1,000 euros, then I have in 1 year 1,040 euros. At a first step, I would say, well, 1,040 is more than 1,000, so I can buy more goods tomorrow. But there is something which makes it a little bit more complicated, because over time, prices are changing in general. And especially in times like this, where we have very high inflation rates, we have also to make expectations about what are the prices tomorrow. Because if the prices have risen more than 4%, then of course I cannot buy as much goods with more money, 1,040 euros, after I've invested in some bond at 4%. But if prices have risen more than 4%, then I cannot buy more real goods tomorrow. And this dependence between prices and interest rates, about this we want to talk now. So let's take an example. Suppose we have an investment of K, and let's say K is 1,000 euros. And let's say we have some secure investment opportunity with an interest rate of 4%. Then, as I already said, tomorrow, per annum, or after 1 year, we have 1,000 euros times 1 plus 4% is 1,040. But now we have to think about if prices are increasing over 1 year, for example, by 3%, then we have to ask ourselves, well, if I would know this, or if my expectation is that inflation is 3%, and for inflation in economics, we usually use the Greek letter pi. So it's not 3.14, it is the letter for inflation. Then we can ask ourselves, what is the value of 1,040 euros today? So what is the value of future money of 1,040 euros today if I assume that inflation is 3%? And I think you have talked about these concepts in mathematics or investment before. So what do you have to do? Yes, you have to discount it. So then, what is the value of 1040 euros today if inflation is 3%? And this means we have to discount 1040 euros by 3%. So we obtain 1040 over, what do I have to do then? Yeah, yes, great. And we interchange now this interest rate you have used in your other lectures just with now our inflation rate pi. So 1 plus 3%. And how would you call this in a lecture of investment? PV, yes. So this is the present value. So compare with present value. So, and now we can ask with which interest rate or real interest rate we or for with which real interest rate or what is now the real interest rate for our investment of 1,000 euros. Because, of course, in the end, we have not the value of 1040, but this present value. And this lowers for us the interest we obtain via the inflation. So then this means in real terms, we obtain only a real interest rate of 1000 times 1 plus r, and this has then to equal the present value 1040 over 1 plus 3%. R, yes, and R is the real interest rate R, small letter r. So, and for this also we then call this I the nominal interest rate, and let's highlight this real interest rate, nominal interest rate, and real interest rate R. Well, this is now for the special case where I assumed 4% and 1,000, but this is a general dependence since I can rewrite my 1040 as just 1000 times 1 plus 4% over 1 plus 3%. Well, and this means that the original amount of investment can be generally cancelled, and this is my nominal interest rate I, this is my inflation rate pi, and for this then I obtain the general dependence between real interest rates and nominal interest rates and inflation. And behind this derivation is just what you have seen already in your first semester in mathematics, in investment theory and so. Well, and then, mostly we will find in many books and in many presentations that we just take the difference between inflation and not inflation, real nominal interest rates and inflation in order to get the real interest rate. But here you have to be careful because this is only an approximation. Because again, an inflation rate and an interest rate are nothing else than growth rates. And so in this case, we have the same problem as I mentioned it already when we looked at economic growth, real growth, nominal growth, and the dependence there. We saw also that in general, we cannot say that real growth is just nominal growth minus the growth rate of the GDP deflator. If you look at your former slides, and this is the same reason as we have it here, that it is only a first order approximation, and you should keep in mind that it is okay if the parameters are below 0%. Then the error you are making is not that large, somewhere in the third, fourth digit. But keep in mind, if we are going back just some month, then we had inflation rates of 10%, even in Germany, in some months. Or if you are going to developing countries, there, of course, you have inflation rates, interest rates in with 2 digits. Or look as a special case right now at Turkey. There you have inflation rates. The official inflation rate is, I think, now 70%. But if you ask the people or if you go into the economy a bit deeper, then you even know that the true inflation rate is even higher than 60-70% in Turkey right now. And if you then calculate it, not with this formula here, so with the present value, but with this approximation, then you will make a large mistake. So please keep this in mind. Well, and then of course, we don't know where the prices are tomorrow. So in general, we call then also the Fisher relation that we interchange the inflation rate with the expected inflation rate. So this is what we in general find as the Fisher equation, and it is called the Fisher equation because it is famous economist in the beginning of the 20th century, and he was talking very much about these dependencies. Of course, these dependencies was known before, but he put this dependence into science. Okay, then, yeah, let's move now, since we talked in general about money. What is money today? Well, here we had money is in general a good with these properties. And what is money today? What is an euro? What is an US dollar? And there we can say that money has developed over time. Well, we started more or less with gold, and then during the development of the societies over time, we invented the coins, and then we invented also paper money. Well, the first time paper money was, we have found it in China, and then afterwards in the Renaissance around 15, 16, 1700, then also in Europe. And then the Industrial Revolution came, and yeah, during this time in the 19th century, we had an explosion of paper money, but still we had a so-called backup of gold behind these paper money. So still you more or less were always allowed with your German Reichsmark, with the British pound, with an US dollar, that you could say, well, still I can change this paper money because of the promise of the government, the states, that in general I could change this into gold. So until 1931, there we had the system of the so-called gold standard. This was an international promise between the most powerful countries, Germany, UK, United States, France, and so on. Well, then we had the catastrophe of Second World War, and then, as I already mentioned it when we talked about the balance of payment in the Magic Square, in Bretton Woods, this small town in the neighborhood of Washington, we had the system of fixed exchange rates related to the US dollar, and behind the US dollar was still the promise of the United States that after you have $1, you can still change it in gold. I don't know if I have mentioned it in the lecture. The second James Bond film is about this Goldfinger. There, Gerd Fröbe as the evil guy, then wanted to destroy Fort Knox, where the gold reserves of the United States were deposited with an atomic bomb. And the idea behind this was, if the gold reserves of the United States are gone, then the economy in the world is breaking down. Well, and then this system of Bretton Woods was called off in 1973. Now we have this system of flexible exchange rates. Still at the main central banks, we find a huge amount of gold reserves, but there is no promise anymore that we can change our euro or our US dollar into gold. So what is now money today? This is just this paper, and in a minute we will talk about it is even more money today. But modern money is then now only a promise of the central banks that we can buy something with this money tomorrow. Well, and it is of course not only a promise of the central banks, because who owns the central banks? We ourselves. So we are promising ourselves that we have a stable money. And this we have really to keep in mind. We make the promise to ourselves in the stability of our societies. And for this reason, we call modern money, so to speak, as fiat money. And this is a mixture of Latin and English. Money, of course, is money. And do you know what fiat in Latin means, or what the Yes, so this is the picture out of nothing, and so I don't know if you know the Pater Noster, and there is fiat voluntas tua, your will happen, and so this just means money will happen. And this is Latin. Well, so we are printing money and just say this is money, and we are promising that you can buy something with this. So, for this, I think as an example, or to think about it physically, we talk about paper money, but of course, how many goods you are buying with paper money? Think about by yourself. In Germany, we are still buying quite a lot things with paper money, but I don't know. Maybe you go sometimes to Sweden, to Scandinavia. They there are, if you are going to Stockholm, you almost cannot buy many things anymore with paper money. And think about uh, yeah the digital currencies we have right now, and also the central banks in Europe, for example, think about a digital euro and something like this. So we have there are many other things which have then the same properties we talked about, with the promise that if we say this is a euro, or this is something in units of euros, that we can buy something. And so we are distinguishing in Europe three, especially actually three different kinds of money. Actually, if you go to the ECB, the so-called money aggregate M0 is not defined, but we would then say, well, this is cash money, but most times we are not buying our goods with cash money. We are buying this just with our credit cards, with our banking cards. And so what is behind this? Behind this is just our banking account. And these are banking accounts with an overnight deposit. So every day I can take this money away from the bank. And also you can think about accounts as PayPal, or if you have an Amazon account, then you are, I think, connect this account with your credit card, and all this is, of course, money. So all these accounts, especially your banking accounts and all these other new modern ways are money. So then we define M1 as cash money plus these overnight deposits. Well, then we can think of, because in general, what we call money is when we are doing something, some interchange, some exchange, where we have to pay so that this exchange really happens. And then we even can say we sometimes exchange things not directly with our credit card. We can also say that for a larger good, so to speak, you can say, well, here you see my banking account. And there I have also a deposit with a maturity of 3 months, 6 months, or something like this. And you show this your opponent, and you say, well, I do not have cash today, but you see that I have it in some time, so we can so I can buy a real good today with the promise that I have the cash tomorrow to pay it. So also then I can buy things. And therefore, one increases this maturity from daily deposits to longer maturities from 3 months up to 2 years, where we can say if you have these deposits or these investments, we can also interchange real goods for this on services. And therefore, we include this in another larger money aggregate, M2. And then we even widen this up. Then we are going to the banking sector, to all our financial institutions. And they, of course, do not interchange if they are dealing with each other. Then they are not changing goods with overnight deposits or even with these smaller amounts here. They use for the interaction in the financial sector then things like repurchase agreements, that they say just, well, here is something which is a security for you, that if something happens, you get it. And only these things are interchanged between the financial institutions, or money market funds, debt securities, and also here in general, one looks at a maturity up to 2 years. And in a minute, and if you are looking in the newspaper, in the media, or somewhere else, and then it is talked about the volume of money is increasing. If it is not further specified, in general, these money aggregate M3 is meant. Okay, question? You cannot say what is the most common. Then also these rating agencies step in, where you have investments and they grade it triple A, double A, and so on. And the financial institutions, they have their investment portfolios with these investments which are rated triple A, double A, and then especially the central banks have defined what kind of ranking and how many of the large rating agencies have to give this investment portfolio a rating of at least A plus or something like this. Then you are allowed to use it to interchange it. Well, and there is a large um, volume of these investments when you look at the, yeah, so to speak, stable countries and the government bonds of these stable countries. Yep. Well, this was the huge problem we had in the financial crisis, because then many of these investments the banks had in their portfolios, they had to downgrade it overnight from AAA to investment grade to C or something like this. And well, this was the reason for the collapse of many banks, especially of Lehman Brothers in the United States. Then, of course, you have a real problem. And also in Europe, then we had the huge problem when we saw then, especially in Greece, well, all the numbers which we know from Greece are some fairy tale numbers. And well, then we agreed that we said Greece is formally not insolvent, but there was a split between private investment and institutional investment. So as a private person, there was no insolvency for your Greek investment, but the financial institutions, they had to depreciate their Greek investments by 50%. So in practice, we have to admit Greece was insolvent. But from a juridical point of view, we defined it as they were not insolvent. Yeah. Well, Bitcoin is, yeah, a quite, yeah, it is not easy to answer because let's go to the properties. Scarcity for Bitcoins, because we have these algorithm that they're behind. We have these mathematical problem which has to be solved, and this problem becomes exponentially more complicated, because this is now the reason, yeah, that we need very much energy to create a new Bitcoin. And also, this is different to other cryptocurrencies that, in general, the amount of numbers of Bitcoins is also finite. So, to speak, there we have an artificial scarcity of a Bitcoin. Divisibility also okay. Um, Storability, I take it in brackets because if you look at the insolvency or the breakdown of what was it, Sam Friedman, the crypto FTX, yes. So there just billions of digital currency were gone. So we don't know really how secure is the system. Transfer transferability, I would say okay, because this blockchain technology seems to be really a quite good technology to transfer it. And here I would make two brackets, inequality, because of the high volatility of the Bitcoin. So many people then say, yes, you can pay for this. You can even buy a coffee in Amsterdam with Bitcoin. But on the other hand, you have this high risk of this high volatility of the value of a Bitcoin. So this will be really, really interesting how this goes further on. And then there is also another problem. Some economists then say if we are going to use Bitcoin or digital currencies more and more and more, then maybe, and this we see already in China, then maybe the countries itself, the government, step in because one of our main rights in a country is to give out the money. And if this is individualized via a digital currency, then maybe we start to prohibit or to decrease somehow by law the use of these, so to speak, free digital currencies. But I don't know where the development is going in the future, because also we have these, I already mentioned it, the projects of a digital euro. You even have areas in China where they're in opposite said in some areas, some cities, or so to speak, example cities, they by law said you have to use the a digital yuan, so a digital Chinese currency, for example, to pay your taxes and something like this. So this is really, really interesting how this will develop in the future. But I would say most properties we can say okay, but you have then some properties where it is not clear if you really can say that this is money. Yeah. Well, this is then here the question we had until the 1970s. Oops, where we are here. Until the 1970s, we had something like this with the gold standard. So some people argue it, but well, we have to use it, and if it's in this kind finite, then of course this is still also a source of yeah of the change of the value. So, and this would then go more in the direction that it is something like a classical investment. So I think it is some really new development we have to keep in mind, and even what is also possible, these blockchain technology, besides not using it for a digital currency, but this blockchain chain technology, for example, we can use to individualize financial transactions. Because why do we have banks or the financial institutions right now? Because in the middle, we need somebody, if some two people from the United States and Europe want to interact. So then we need somebody where we are both, yeah, we both think that it is okay when we do our interaction via this institution, when we are interchanging something, so that in the middle nothing happens. And with the blockchain technology, it seems to be possible that I interact with the guy in the United States directly without a financial institution. But also, this is an open development because maybe you know that I studied physics at my first studies, and now the development of quantum computing steps also in, and this would mean that we don't know if we, with these new kind of computers, maybe also the crypto algorithms are also not secure in the future. So this is a really open question. I cannot answer it. Okay, then I want to show you how much money we have if we look at these aggregates. And then, of course, here roughly we have 16 trillion euros. And well, if we compare this amount Eurozone GDP, what would you say? What is the GDP of the Eurozone, roughly? We can look it up, of course, but if you have to approximate it, what is the GDP of Germany? This we had already. This were roughly, I think, 4 trillion. And do you know what is the part of Germany of the Eurozone? Huh? An idea? Well, this also we can approximate. We talked about what in order to interpret GDP as a measure of the performance of a country. Then we also said we have to keep in mind the number of people living there, because if new people moving in, then they increase consumption, and this increases also GDP. So we have a direct correlation between the number of people and GDP. How many people are living in Germany? Roughly 80 million. How many people roughly living in the Eurozone? About 300, a little bit more. So roughly we can say that GDP, Germany is around 25% of the Eurozone. Well, and if this is the case, then we have roughly 16 trillion euros of the Eurozone. I think the true value is a little bit lower, about 13 or something like this, but roughly, let's see it, that we have the real number of this GDP Eurozone. There, 14. No, this is in US dollar, and we have an exchange rate of 1.07. So it should be roughly 13, I think, then, in euros. This is the European Union and the Euro area. Do we have it here? No, these are only the growth rates. Here. Again, US dollar divided by 1.1 is roughly 13. Okay. So GDP of the Eurozone 2020 is roughly 13 to 14 trillion euros. Well, and then you see this amount here is roughly the amount of money. Well, and this is also not very surprisingly, because of course that we have an amount of money for the things we are using the money, and GDP is all goods and services we have bought for final consumption in the last year within a country or within an area. Then this amount also seems reasonable. Okay, and for this, we can talk now about the so-called quantity theory of money. And this is just the argumentation behind it. Now, we take the things for which we are using the money, and then we can make the statement that what is the price or the actual price we have times the quantity. These are, so to speak, all goods we are buying, we want to buy. And well, in a modern economy, we are buying these goods with money, and then we can say within a period how often we can use the same euro, how often we can use the same US dollar. And for this, we then multiply the amount of money with the velocity of money, and the velocity of money is, so to speak, how many times we can use the same euro, the same US dollar. And of course, in short term, we would say that the velocity of money is more or less a constant. Because why? Yeah, this depends on our technical framework. And then we can say in history, we mainly used paper money, we used cash. Then, especially in the 70s, in the 80s, we had the development of using our bank accounts, and we actually also had the transaction machines outside the real banks. So in these times, we started that we could just get cash also if the bank hadn't opened. And then the development of credit cards and banking cards. And now all the payment possibilities in the digital world we have. So this over time then of course increased the velocity of money. But if we are looking at a perspective of 1, 2, or 3 years, then we could say that the velocity of money is more or less constant. And also we can say that the real output, or then that the real output, the process, if we look at developed countries, then we have growth rates of about 1 or 2%, or in Germany we are even stagnating. And if we compare this with the development of prices also on a monthly basis, then we can say that the real output is much slower adjusting than the price level is adjusting. So in this case, we more or less can say that in short term, the velocity of money, and in short term, the real output is changing much, much slower than the amount of money and the price level. And if we assume that these two are more or less constant, then we have more or less a one-to-one dependence between the amount of money and the price level. And this, is then the argumentation we have if the central banks start, so to speak, just to print money, that this translates directly more or less in inflation. Well, and if we take then this equation as given, that it really holds, then we can say, okay, we manipulate it, that we have on the left side only the amount of money, then this is P times Y over V. And then taking classically that this is the money supply, because this is how many euros the European Central Bank is giving out. Then we have our money demand, and in equilibrium, this has to be equal. So this is then money supply. And quite often then you find that we define this dividing by the velocity, that we write this as a new variable k called the cash holding coefficient. And then we have money demand is the constant, because in short run V is more or less constant. times the price level. But this together is again our income measured in euros. And then from this, we get also a money demand function. But this money demand function is then only depending on income. But also, of course, if this goes up, this goes also up. So here we have also a positive dependence of money demand and income. And this is the so-called classical money demand function. Well, and this is then also when we later on are talking about different theories, macroeconomic different theories, then of course you have different outcomes, which assumptions you are making. And we can make the assumption that money demand is a function of income and interest rates. This is then the so-called Keynesian. Keynesian money demand function. This is John Maynard Keynes. About him, we will talk then when we are going to theory. This is maybe one of the, or maybe this was the most influential economist in the beginning of the 20th century. And this would be then more or less in opposite, the so-called classical view on it. And there we more or less mainly focus on the transaction argument for holding money. That, well, of course, also classical economists, they would not say there is no dependence on interest rates, but there are then, if you have a very straight classical view, then you would say the dependence on income is much, much more important than the dependence on interest rates. Yep. In income, yes. Yep. So the direction of dependence is still the same, but in this case we say the dependence on interest rates is not that important, and therefore we leave it out. Yeah, and well, then of course also we can translate this dependence between the absolute values of money, velocity, prices, and output into a dependence of growth rate. This we will do in an exercise. That this translates just that the growth rates, the dependence between the growth rates is that you then can just sum up the growth rates, and there we can say then this is inflation. And if we say that this is more or less constant, that we have then the dependence that inflation is roughly the growth rate of money minus the GDP growth rate. And if we then also have this classical view that in general the growth rate, and for this remember the concept of potential output, that we are in general in the long run are only fluctuating around these potential output. So the business cycle is around our long run growth. Then again, we could say that if we really start to aggressively push the increase of money, that the only thing what happens in the long run in the economy is that we create inflation. Well, and this was, the main view of some other very, very influential economist in the last century, Milton Friedman. And he even made the statement, well, what is inflation? Inflation is always and everywhere only a monetary phenomenon. Well, of course, and you can criticize this view. So this is maybe one of the, very controversial view on the one side. There you say, please, central bank, do more or less nothing. Only look at the amount of money, that there is enough money that we can interchange goods. But do not think that you can make monetary policy aggressively, that you can even that you can change anything. And if we look back in the last decade, then we really were puzzled, because we really increased, and this you see here in the amount of money here, that we really increased almost 10 years. We doubled the amount of money. And this, the same picture we have for the United States. And we were really puzzled why we do not have any inflation in this time. I showed all you also the numbers. During these times we were somewhere around 1% inflation. But then here in this time, really inflation exploded. And I think, although we had then these political crises, this was also an effect where we could not surprise, because then we had the turn from the short run effects into the long run effects. And these classical view, we have to admit, in the long run, it is coming. We don't know when, but it will come, and we should not surprise if we are always starting printing money, that somewhere in the future inflation rates will really start to rise. Okay, let's do also these two slides for today, because then we can say that if we think that we have these one-to-one dependence between an increase in money and prices, so if the statement of Milton Friedman holds, that inflation is always and everywhere only a monetary phenomenon, then we have the so-called classical dichotomy. And this will mean that we have a definite split between real variables and monetary variables. And real variables is then that we only look in the production at the quantity, and only at real wages. This what we have done in the Fisher equation. This we have to do for all variables. We always have to revalue this with the prices, real interest rates. This is the Fisher equation. So everything has to be real valued by price developments, and that this has to be distinguished from the nominal variables, and all these nominal variables are then measured in money units. And this is then that we always think about, well, I have €1,000, I have $1,000. What in the end matters is what can I buy with these €1,000. And if we say that this quantity theory of money holds strictly, then we have an independence between real and nominal variables. And this is so-called the neutrality of money. And if you give me another 2 minutes, there is one very famous thought experiment of Adam Smith. Maybe you have heard in school about Adam Smith, the Inquiry of Nations. So one of the, so to speak, first or most famous economists in the 17th, 18th century. And he made for the UK the following thought experiment. Well, if we overnight change the color of pennies from, I think, from red to green, and we announce at the following morning that the green pennies are twice as valuable as the red pennies, what happens in the economy? And then the argumentation was nothing. Because if you go then and everybody knows that the green penny has a double value of the red penny yesterday, and you are buying on the next morning a bread, then this bread will also double in prices because everybody knows this. And so to speak, if we start to print money via the central bank and give out this money to the people, and at first we would think, well, now I'm richer, but everybody knows that everybody is richer, then all the people who sell the goods will just increase their prices. And this is the so-called neutrality of money. And if this really holds, well, the argumentation seems logical, but then we have to look in practice, does this really hold? And then we have to admit at sometimes it holds and in other times it doesn't hold because we have some frictions within the markets. Okay, then this for today. And on Thursday we see us again.